Hi, and welcome to The Bright Balloon, a podcast where I'm sharing bright ideas for your balloon business. My name is Sarah Meyer, and I'm a balloon business owner like you, and I love the creative side of what I do, but I really love the business side, which seems to be the part where most people struggle. So I'm here to help. Each week, I'm bringing you an episode full of bite-sized tips you can use to make improvements in your business. I want you to make more money, eliminate stress, and learn along with me as we grow our creative businesses together. Welcome to The Bright Balloon, presented by 17 Hats. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Bright Balloon podcast. This month is brought to you by our friends at Kalisan. Once again, they have come on as our curated sponsor, meaning that they have hand-selected each of the guests you'll hear from in the month of July. If you are not familiar with Kalisan, let me introduce you. This brand has truly earned its spot in our toolkit with stunning colors, on-trend finishes, and a buttery soft stretch that makes every installation smoother. Whether you're testing out new palettes or stocking up on staples, this month is all about exploring what makes Kalisan unique. So stick around all month for hand-picked guests, tips, and themes brought to you by Kalisan. And kicking the month off is DJ Morrow. He is a fine artist who uses balloons as his artistic medium. So this episode is quite different from our typical episode where we talk about all things business. Instead, we are focusing on balloons as an art form. It's a really interesting story, a really interesting conversation. And even if you don't see yourself pursuing art by using balloons, I think you're going to enjoy this interview. So thank you so much for taking the time, DJ, and thank you to our friends at Kalisan for once again providing us with a great lineup of artists. Let's take a quick break and head over to the UGlue hotline for some great advice that sticks, and then we'll get into this week's episode. Welcome to the UGlue hotline, where we discuss great advice that sticks, brought to you by Pro Tapes. Pro Tapes is a leading manufacturer of specialty tape products like Pro Artist, Pro Gaff, and our favorite balloon tape, UGlue, which helps you create amazing balloon arrangements and decorations. If you have a tip, send me a DM on Instagram at The Bright Balloon. Today's tip is brought to you by me. This is one of my favorite tips, which is to purchase a Ryobi leaf blower, a mini leaf blower. This cannot be confused with the Ryobi pool raft inflator. It's smaller, it's loud, and it doesn't do the trick. You have to buy the mini leaf blower. It's powerful, it's battery powered, so when I go on a job, I use the leaf blower to inflate all of my jumbos cordlessly, quickly, and on site to top my columns. It stays in my van and it saves me so much time looking for an outlet for an inflator. Having it be battery powered is the best. It was a total game changer in my business. So hopefully that helps some of you who are on the go and needing to inflate. All right, welcome, DJ. I'm so excited to talk to you with a really fresh new angle about doing balloon art as fine art, and I'm really excited to hear about your experiences. Before we jump in, give us an introduction. Tell us who you are and where you are and a little bit about what you do.
Hey, I'm DJ Morrow. I do balloons as fine art, and I'm based out of Houston, Texas, and basically I've been doing this angle on balloons as a medium for the last 5 years now. I used to do mostly just regular balloon twisting, restaurants, parties, festivals, you know, the whole 9 yards, and like a smattering of balloon decor stuff here and there. And then around 2019, I was dealing with my own like personal issues and stuff, and had like some stuff I needed to work through. And I'm a very artistic person, and that's my go-to thing, is sort of an artist therapy type deal. And so I turned to the balloons to express these ideas, and I found it really helpful expressing the things that I was struggling with in an artistic way, because I could encapsulate that and sort of put a bow on it, and then it would allow me to move past it, especially because balloons are this ephemeral medium, right? Mm-hmm. It's not like I'm making a giant sculpture of like my trauma or whatever, and then it'll sit in the living room for the next how many years, right?
Yeah.
You know, I make it and I get a cool picture and then it's gone.
Yeah.
And Yeah, and that's helped me with a lot of things. And then the next year, the pandemic struck, right? And that was something that affected us all. And 6 months of my work was just wiped off the calendar in an instant. And so I had a lot of time at home to make more art about even more pressing concerns and issues that I was struggling with, on top of the economic uncertainty, but also the isolation and the stresses that puts on relationships and stuff. So I made some more art about that, and then I never thought that it would be like my main thing, because it was a focus on some very like heavy topics and like really dramatic imagery and stuff that's not generally like family friendly. And then like it just started gaining a lot of attention and traction online. And one of the recreations that I did, Sada devouring his son, like got like the #1 post on Reddit when I posted it. Not even under my own personal account, social media, because I didn't want my business side to be associated with that.
Yeah.
Right? And then like once that like blew up online and went viral, it sort of made me rethink, okay, how viable is this as a way forward, because if I have the potential to be able to do something great with the medium in this new way, I would like be really unsatisfied with myself if I didn't at least give it a full fair shake. You know what I'm saying?
So where are you now in terms of like twisting, entertaining, that being a business, and the fine art? Like where does your time lay? Is it 100% fine art and you're not doing the twisting anymore? Or like what are you doing most of the time?
So I've largely retired booking my own balloon gigs. And so I take like gigs from my friends here and there, do freelance work and whatnot, the occasional decor gig that comes by, but I don't advertise it, because to me, marketing or selling myself as the fine art balloon artist is already such an uphill battle that any steps that I can take to disassociate it from the conceptions of balloons that people regularly think of is a step in the right direction for being taken seriously and people engaging seriously in the work and the ideas that I put out there. So the main way I put money on the table right now is actually I film Indian and Pakistani weddings.
Okay.
And that's like out of left field. That's not even balloons there, but it does keep me extremely artistically active, and it keeps me on my feet, and it's a constant exercise in composition and lighting and the things that I use in my balloon artistic practice. But it also folds in all of the stuff that I learned from being a balloon artist, things like crowd control and learning how to manage your gigs correctly, and interfacing with clients and new people every single day. That's the kind of stuff that being a balloon artist really prepared me for.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's interesting. So that's like your quote-unquote day job, and then you're doing the fine art in the evenings. And you're not like, I don't think you're doing yourself justice. I was stalking you a little bit online before. Like, you're having gallery shows. Like, you're not just making these things and then taking photographs and that's it. You're having actual shows, which I have lots of questions about. I'm a former art teacher, so I'm just like, A, how did you do that? B, how do you make the balloons last? And C, do people get it? So let's start with like, what was your first in-person show, and what does that look like with such a temporary medium?
Yeah, for sure. The first in-person show was really out of the gate enormous undertaking. I was at the studio, Hardy and Ant Studios in Houston. I had rented a studio short term, actually, because before that I had been working over the last 6 months with the Balloon Museum, if anyone's ever heard of that. Yeah, they have like a bunch of locations around the world, and they were working on a New York exhibit, and they were working with me on the Balloon Street, which is these like Instagrammable art booths and stuff. And we went back and forth and had a lot of different versions and iterations. And we weren't really quite there on the greenlight stage with everything, but I knew that in order to complete everything in time, if we did end up finalizing things, I absolutely needed an in-person studio. And so I went out on a limb, and that's always a gamble. And it didn't pay off in this regard because we couldn't quite come to an agreement on the aesthetic direction. And so I worked for a month on some other stuff in the studio, and then the gallery owner saw my dedication, heard my story, felt good about my work, and just offered me the main space for the art crawl, which is this big event they do every year with several different studios, and everyone in the studio puts out their work, and they have a large main gallery that they get one artist to kit out. And I took it farther than probably anybody has in that studio with putting up these like branches and sort of foliage up top leading to in the hallways to the main gallery, so it seemed like you were entering a forest, and then it got darker and more sparse until the main gallery opened up, and it was this like dark fantasy forest, and there was 3 main centerpieces, and I was telling these vignettes about critical thinking and how people can take advantage of these sort of pitfalls in human thinking in various ways, and how that relates to things like religion and hero worship and things like that, subverting these imagery of these monstrous characters in a way that is a bit underhanded, because the moral was about something other than their monstrous nature, in a sense, where it's like a lot of people pay too much attention to the surface and get taken in by very polished, very charismatic people who generally don't at first glance look like monsters that they may be, and so it was kind of a play on that. And
well, it's obviously like a deep concept.
Yes.
How do you? I would imagine part of this struggle is like people don't associate balloons with that. They're like fun, cutesy, birthday party, colorful. Like, are people? Do you think that adds to their surprise when they come and see your shows?
I think it adds a lot more than surprise. Surprise is a great element of it. Like there's so many amazing physical elements that sort of fold into like metaphysical possibilities when it comes to artistic exploration with balloons, right? The fact that they are associated with this childhood innocence, right? And they're also associated with celebration and stuff. Mm-hmm. And as an artist, when you have a medium that has all these built-in associations, that's a gold mine for either playing with the associations and drawing people's attention to those associations in terms of like what you're trying to say, or juxtapositioning it with like very far end on the other side ideas, themes, and imagery, and that will like sort of give a snap shock to the system is sort of how I like to look at it. Mm-hmm. And that basically puts people in a mindset that they're not comfortable in, that they are unfamiliar with, I should say.
Sure.
And that is the best way of, I think, throwing ideas at people when they're out of their regular loop of thinking, their regular mindset, where they think they have everything figured out, right? And they have all of the world in the boxes that they put it in. And you go and you blow up one of those boxes, and now they have to take what you're saying more at face value with a more critical, open lens. That's the idea, and I think it works in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
You have the occasional person that sees the balloons, and then they just like, oh, that's nice, they discount it, But most people, when they see the balloons, they go, I don't understand this. There must be something something else deeper going on, and then it allows them to think more deeply and more critically about what's in front of them.
Well, then logistically, how are you making these sculptures last? Or like, how long is this show? Because I know, I'm not doing gallery shows, but we've done installations, and it was a struggle to make round balloons last and look good for, 2 weekends that it was open. How long are these shows, and do you have any tips of like making your balloons last?
Yeah, for sure. So the Hardy and Ants show was really interesting. The art crawl event only lasted for 3 days, and so that was all I needed it to last for. However, the scale of it and the fact that that build was 96% all me, right? Mm-hmm. I had a couple of people come in to like blow up some balloons, help me put together a balloon wall, stuff like that. But the amount of time that was needed in there and the amount of like technical expertise at the same time, there was really only me that was able to do it. And so I had to very carefully lay out the timeline for how I was going to put this together, because even if it only needed to last for 3 days, I had to start building 2 weeks in advance.
Yeah.
Right? And so I had everything laid out from largest and simplest to smallest and most detailed at the end. I had a 2-week timeline for every single day for how I was gonna build from the bottom up, from the big to small. And so I started with the large balloon walls. I started with sort of the core of these giant trees that I was building and the big cave and stuff. And then as I completed it, I would slowly move on to the finer and finer details, because, these 160 details, they will start to shrink and fade and within like a day or two.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one strategy, is just being able to work from large to small.
So some of it's like 2 weeks old, but some of it is like 1 day old.
Yeah, exactly. And then by the end, because I've laid it out all in the correct sequence, everything looks as it should, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so every exhibition is going to work on a different timeline and also have different subject matter and different looks and different techniques, right? So the next exhibition that I did was a full week-long exhibition at the Young Center. And so it had these two main elements. It had these large environmental pieces that wrapped around the entire room, and they were, it was a lattice of honeycomb. And the interesting thing about the honeycomb was it was made from 100% balloon dogs. I found when playing with just balloon dogs one day that you can line them up in such a way that you can create a tileable hexagon pattern. And I just thought that was like the neatest thing, and I put that into the back of my mind. You know, a lot of the times I'll come up with these like technical or like artistic little tidbits, little treats, and like on their own they're not much, but it's always great to like accumulate as many of those in your back pocket as you can.
Yeah.
So that it will be like sort of the cherry on the top for whatever project happens to need it in the future. But anyways, the cool thing about that is that because it's sort of a tileable pattern, when the balloons, they shrink, they all shrink at an even pace, right? At an even rate, and everything stays more or less even and uniform. And so that's another trick that you can sort of do to hide the aging, is sort of front load the building with all the aspects that are very uniform in nature, and then they'll all shrink and nothing will look uneven or out of place. And then the second aspect of that exhibition was this giant sculpture of this guy with this lion head, and he's up on a cross and disemboweled, and there's a lot of imagery that went into that of my upbringing in this cult that I grew up with, and it told through the story of Samson fighting a lion. And so it was a very grotesque figure, and it was the message was about the decay and the fight and the struggle and the sort of pain that comes after that. And so that was actually totally fine that it aged over a 7-day period, because it was supposed to look shrunken down and decayed and
Sure,
stuff,
like
so.
it can be part of like the performance art aspect
Yeah,
of it, that it
exactly.
actually doesn't
And
last. Yeah.
not just the performance, just on an aesthetic level, it fit with the project, you know? So you have
Yeah.
to, like, pick and choose your projects that will work with the timeline given. And then this latest exhibition that I did was a group show, and that was interesting because it didn't have that aspect that I could, like, fold into the aesthetic of it. It was a very polished, very clean, almost sterile composition that I did, and so everything did need to look good for the show. And originally it was only supposed to be a week long, and we ended up keeping it up for the entire month, which I was surprised just how well that lasted. And I think there was a couple factors that went into that. First was I used high float for the first time, which definitely made a difference. It's tricky, and I learned a lot, and you can't use high float for everything, right? I was doing this tree with, I ended up using over 500 balloons, 360s, and yeah, that's like a gallon of high float and so much time, and it puts so much more strain on your hands, so I quickly gave up on using high float for that. But it was one of those things where everything was wrapped around a single central column, and so when everything shrank, it did it at an even pace and just sort of shrink wrapped the entire sculpture in a way that worked with the piece. But the characters, I had several different characters in the scene, and that was very important that they remain fresh. And the high float worked to varying degrees. You know, distortion is not a great pairing with high float, and because, as far as I understand it, high float needs to evaporate out of the balloon, right? And so if you put a balloon in another balloon, then that will prevent that evaporation properly. Yeah, and so I got a little bit of like puff up from the distortion effects, but despite that, I think it still made quite a bit of a difference. It kept them in their proper like shape and size roughly for the whole month. And the heads, I was doing these round heads that had small distortion features, and they also had these inset features, and the high float worked perfectly. They stayed beautiful. The head's the most important part of the characters for the whole month, which I was super impressed by. And I think that had to do with the fact that it was only a single round balloon inside of another round balloon. And so the balloon sort of acted like a single membrane, I think.
Yeah.
That allowed the high float to evaporate.
Well, and sometimes what I have found is like it's the environment. Like it's the actual building you're in, you know? Like I have set up and it's like these look amazing 2 weeks later, and then I'll do something in a hotel with like a big HVAC system or whatever, and you're like, this looks like absolute trash, and it's been like a 3-day weekend. You know, like I feel like sometimes it really is just like the luck of the draw.
That was going to be the third factor, is that it was in New York, which is a lot cooler and a lot drier than Houston. Houston is hot and it is wet, humid, and those are the worst environment for balloons. So I think the New York weather really did it a lot of favors. And then the last aspect of the environment was just these big organic clouds, which, especially when they're white, you just put them up and you forget about them. They'll look good for the rest of the month.
Yeah.
Yeah, I high floated the 5 inches just to keep them the right size, and then it was all golden from there. But it was a big learning experience with high float. It is not something you want to go into blindly. You want to make sure you have some experience and make sure it works with all the techniques you're planning to use before the actual build date, because it will put so much extra time in
it's a
your
lot.
schedule that sometimes you just don't have.
Yeah.
I worked 2 whole days, 20, I think it was 29 hours of twisting at the end of the day. because so much of that high float just gave me trouble and ended up having to work through the whole night.
Wow.
So be careful with that.
And you mentioned, though, you mentioned two things. First of all, you grew up in a cult. I have to talk about this. It's on your About page, and I was not expecting that. But first, I want to talk about that you said this is a group show. So I'm curious who else is doing this and how you guys kind of collaborate. So let's take a quick break and then touch on those two topics when we come back. This episode is brought to you in part by Having a Party Wholesale, your one-stop shop for all things balloons and party supplies. They carry everything from foils to frames, plus this month's sponsor, Kalisan Balloons, known for their vibrant colors and soft shine. Stock up at havingaparty.com and don't forget to use the code podcast at checkout to save 5% on your order. Support the brands that support the show and your business. Thank you so much to Having a Party Wholesale for your ongoing support for the Bright Balloon podcast. All right, welcome back. You breezed through the fact that you grew up in a cult and that impacts a lot of your art. I knew that because I read your About page. So you have this on your artist page, just on your website. So it's clearly a big part of your upbringing. Give us the Cliff's Notes, because if I don't circle back on that little comment you made, people are going to be sending me some questions. So what's the short story of your upbringing?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Family International. It was in its heyday, in its most infamous phase, known as the Children of God. And it is something that, like, a lot of ex-cult members aren't comfortable with talking about. You know, they get a lot of, like, trauma around it, and they also have, like, a lot of people who stigmatize it and jump to conclusions, especially with a cult that was as notorious as it was. But I found that talking about it gave me sort of an armor that allowed me to get in front of people who may make judgments about me based on that, especially considering that I was born into it and we left, in my early teens. So it's not like I have anything but an extremely unique worldview and set of ideas and perspectives that it gave me, and it really did a lot to inform the work and the art that I do and the way that I approach messaging and approach the visual imagery that I use. My art is so full of, like, biblical references and ideas around cults and around control and stuff like that. And so last year I had been working on this project for a while, a year and a half, to sort of lay out my experience in more explicit detail, telling my story through the story of Samson fighting the lion and finding honey in the lion's carcass later. And that sort of really spoke to me as someone who experienced a lot of bad through the upbringing, but also a lot of good, There was a lot of great experiences with my family, with traveling overseas, with communal living, with the sort of artistic, more firebrand side of things that I really took a lot of good from, and it's really hard to be able to appreciate and fully own all of the good and the joyful and useful aspects of something like that when it's sort of intertangled with a lot of trauma and a lot of dark consequences. And so, like, I wanted to untangle that so that I could better appreciate and be thankful for and utilize the good that came out of all of that. And so that was what my exhibition last year was about. And and a lot of people in the balloon industry actually came from this group, as kids, learning to do balloons on the street as sort of an outreach program, as in hospitals and schools, and as a way to make money. And that was sort of how my parents came to do balloons, which is how I came to do balloons.
Oh, that's really interesting.
So it's very much connected in my story in that way. That is part of the fabric of who I am, and it is it has been good for me to be open about that as something that, you know, I'm not ashamed of, and it's something that is complicated and that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, because not only is it connected with a lot of unsavory past, but it's also deeply connected with religion, and a lot of people are like very comfortable with their religion, and being faced with the more dangerous aspects of religion that may not be a part of their practice can make them uncomfortable. And so, you know, that's why I get in the habit of sort of breezing past it and letting people decide whether or not they want to take the initiative to have that conversation.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing. I mean, I find that's really interesting, and I appreciate you telling us how it kind of connects to your story and your balloon beginnings. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's the honey out of the lion's carcass.
Yeah.
The balloons coming out of it all.
Yeah. Really interesting. You mentioned that particular show, that was a solo exhibition, right? That was the one in New York? Or no, that was the one in your first gallery space.
In Houston.
But you've done collaborations. You've worked with other artists. How do you find them? Are these other balloon people? Are these artists who are just working in different mediums in the same theme? Like, how have you put together these group exhibits?
Well, the group show was the first group show I've actually been a part of in the balloon sense. I've had a print shipped out to Denver, Detroit, to be part of a show there, but that's just like a picture hanging up on the wall.
Okay.
Right? And so this last show was titled Inflation. It's about sort of the economic inflation, but also something being blown up and being created. It was the inaugural show for a new location that the gallery was moving to, so it was also sort of an idea of like balloons as celebration for a
cool
kind of thing. And there was a really interesting mix of artists there who were not necessarily balloon artists. There was one other balloon artist there, Robert Moy of the Brooklyn Balloon Company, and he does like some decor, but he also does some like higher end deliverables in sort of a fashion sort of vibe with it, sort of a luxury brand deal going on. And so his balloons were very interesting because they were resin coated pieces, which is something that
I feel like maybe I saw him on Instagram recently. Like he dips the whole balloon. Maybe there's someone else doing it too. I don't know, or ripping them off. I don't know.
If you've seen it on Instagram, it's probably Loons BA, I think is the Instagram handle. He's been really working hard at refining his version of resin balloons. You know, I think there's this famous artist who made a stool like that you could sit on balloon resin once, and I think that really was the main thing that kicked off a lot of people's fascination with this idea.
Dipping them, and
people ask me a lot, you know, do you want to like use the resin and figure out some way to preserve it? And like, to me, it feels like embalming a corpse. And balloons are these living, almost breathing pieces, and the beauty and the uniqueness of the medium is that it doesn't last, you know? And so why would I be working in this amazing, unique medium and then just fight and try my hardest to sort of subvert the thing that makes it special in the first place?
Right, it's like just use clay or something at that point.
Exactly, which, you know, I can, like, I'm a very multi-talented artist in that way. I have no problem picking up different sculptures, and I often do incorporate other sculpture elements into the balloons. I did like some wire insets for the last exhibition, and that rubbed some people the wrong way, you know, these latex purists who are like, but I had worked with like fantasy flowers in the past, and, you know, it's like I wasn't going to think twice about using those same fantasy flower techniques in a larger balloon piece, because it's just, I'm not doing balloons because balloons are the best and I love balloons. I do love balloons, right? And they are the best. but it was because it is where I'm at in my journey. I was the balloon artist, and now I'm the balloon fine artist, and there is something wonderful about being able to create something big and put all your focus on that, and then the next week it's gone, and it forces you to keep moving, to keep having this momentum of going on to the next thing and the next thing, and there's something very enriching about that, and I think it's really helped in my productivity in ways where I would probably have a lot less artistic output if I was working in a permanent medium.
Yeah. Well, interesting. Who do you follow online to get inspiration from? Like, do you watch other balloon people? Do you watch other artists? Like, where do you hang out online?
So, like, I like to hang out on, like, Balloon Twister Central and places where people are doing interesting stuff. There's not a whole lot of people that are doing what I'm doing in terms of using balloon art to engage with more serious and complex ideas. So I get a lot of my inspiration in terms of thematic inspiration and imagery and stuff from all different sorts of media, video games and TV shows and movies and stuff. To me, like, being an artist, it is a mandate that you can't just make art. You have to go out and live. You have to experience, and you have to talk with as many people as possible and consume as much as possible, because that makes you a deeper, richer person and allows for more of you to draw on when it is time to draw on those things, you know? But balloon conventions are always an amazing place to interface with artists, especially when people are doing competition pieces and coming up with things that really push themselves, because I've noticed that in the U.S. especially, there is sort of a dearth of people doing it purely for the artistic passion in, like, on a really high level, as opposed to places in Asia and Western Europe where they have these large, often publicly funded events, things like big parades and competitions and festivals and stuff. And the output from those masters that you see over there really puts us here in the West to shame in terms of what they're able to accomplish. And so it's really nice when you get to see people at the conventions step outside of their normal role and sort of engage in that practice of pushing the medium to its absolute limits.
Yeah.
And yeah, I get a lot of inspiration from those in-person moments like that.
Cool. Well, let's take one more break, and then we're going to wrap up with our final 3 questions. But this has been fascinating. Thank you so much. Want more behind-the-scenes tips, mindset shifts, and real talk about growing your balloon business? Then you're going to love On the Bright Side, my private podcast feed just for decorators who want more ease, income, and insight. When you join the email list, you'll instantly unlock 3 of our most popular bonus episodes, totally free. These are packed with juicy tips you won't hear on the main feed. So sign up now and start listening instantly. And if you like what you hear, you can subscribe anytime to keep the bonus episodes coming. I'll see you on the bright side. All right, welcome back. Let's wrap this one up. I have final questions that I ask all the guests. They're just for fun. And the first is about traveling and vacation. Where is your favorite spot to escape to?
So this might tie in a little bit to the last answer. I think balloon conventions, like Twist and Shout especially, that is like a vacation that is really hard to top. But second would be just traveling to the Southwest. In my opinion, that is the best, most beautiful place in the United States. going through Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, those desert landscapes with all of the various colors and textures, and it is, you know, solitary, and it allows for a lot of like reflection and meditation and sort of centering yourself, especially when you're living in a big city and there's so much hubbub, and you're at home and you have a list of like 100 different things that you need to do long term and short term, you know. But if you get out there in the desert doing some hiking, like all of that melts away.
Yeah.
You know, you could just focus on being in the moment.
Neat. Next question, a little bit more superficial. What's something you've purchased lately that you are enjoying?
I would say the new microphone setup that I have that unfortunately we're not using.
That we couldn't get to work.
Due to technical issues. But yeah, it's like I have a very sort of high standard for the content that I produce, and I've been shifting towards video content as a vehicle for my projects, because exhibitions are great, but they are an enormous time sink and energy sink in terms of everything. And so it's really important that if I commit to a project like that, that I can get more out of it than just the exhibition, because there's only so many people that can come to these things, right? And I want to reach as many people as possible. And so I'm starting. I haven't put out my first full video yet, but we're in the editing phase right now, and that's for the exhibition that I just did. But I also have another project that is being built sort of brick by brick, and then I have several other concepts that are going to be builds that are primarily going to be done for filming and making these build videos. I follow a lot of like project build YouTube channels and stuff, and I watched some guy carve a T-Rex skull out of some wood and like an hour-long video, and I just sat through that like it was nothing, and I'm like, why aren't I doing this? Like, people love to look at balloons being made. That's why you can have a line of 50 people waiting 2 hours for a balloon sword, because people just love the process, you know. And so that was a decision to go in that direction, and having some quality voiceover work is very important for that.
Yeah, neat, very cool. Last question. What is a small piece of business advice you have for people listening?
So if you're following your passion, right, you don't necessarily have to make it your business, your main financial vehicle, as long as what you're doing can accrue you the skills and the experience to funnel back into your passion. I think that is a perfectly valid and helpful way to go about things. You know, I get practice so much with these compositions and the creative artistic thinking through things like wedding videography and stuff like that, which feeds directly into my work. And so I would say, like, don't get too hung up on making something work in the way that you want to. You know, sometimes if you really want to pursue something great that no one else has done before, you're going to have to pivot once, twice, several times, you know. And so stay light on your feet, stay flexible, and be open to changing your mind about the way you do things.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, DJ. This has been such a fun episode, a twist on our typical topic, and I am so grateful that you took the time to share with us. And thanks so much to Kalisan for choosing you to kick off their curated month. I think it was such a nice conversation.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And thank you to, like, the balloon decor people out there who have been, it seems to me, pushing these balloon companies for prettier and more nuanced and more varied colors. Because, oh my God, as a balloon twister who does more subtle things with the aesthetics, ooh man, it's been a treat with all the colors that Kalisan and other companies have been putting out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we certainly agree. Well, thank you so much, and I will catch up with you sometime in real life, hopefully.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bright Balloon Podcast presented by 17 Hats, my go-to system for booking, billing, and managing my balloon business with ease. If you're ready for more mindset shifts, mini trainings, and strategies to help you grow a profitable, sustainable business, join me on the Bright Side, my private podcast feed just for decorators who want more ease, more income, and more insight behind the scenes of my balloon business. It's just $5 a month, and you can sign up right now in the show notes wherever you're listening. I'll see you on the Bright Side.